Drew Peterson is a notorious household name.
Wait a second, is this guy killing his wives? It became a story that people couldn't get enough of.
His son, Stephen, believes his father is a stand-up guy.
Never in a million years did I think, oh, maybe my dad had something to do with this.
But when wife number 3 dies under mysterious circumstances,
She told her sisters that she feared he would kill her and make it look like an accident.
and wife number 4 disappears without a trace,
They did a massive search for Stacy, and they can't find her.
Drew Peterson's children are forced to face the horrible truth.
Anytime something major like this happens, you know, the first stage is denial. You can't expect ever that your family member would be capable of murder.
In 2007, small-town cop Drew Peterson becomes a media sensation. Under suspicion when his young trophy wife goes missing, Drew thrusts himself into the national spotlight to defend what he insists is his good name.
I understand very well. I mean, the media's done everything they can to keep me in a position looking guilty.
All the while dragging his family along with him. When the truth is finally exposed, it's worse than anyone even imagined. And his son, Stephen, is left to pick up the broken pieces. Stephen Peterson knows his father, Drew, better than anyone.
My dad was always there for us, you know. On the weekends, he'd take us fishing, take us camping a lot, you know, taught us how to ride our bikes. He got us BB guns at an early age, so he taught us how to shoot those. Just, you know, typical father stuff. He was pretty hands-on.
The second of Drew's 6 children from his multiple marriages, Stephen looks up to his father.
My father was a police officer in Bolingbrook, Illinois. He did everything from the undercover man's unit to patrol, and then eventually became a sergeant. When I told my dad that I was going to become a police officer, he was very excited.
But good guy Drew has a dark side. On the evening of February 28, 2004, he breaks his oath to protect. Just down the street from the Peterson household, 40-year-old Kathleen Savio gets ready for bed.
Kathleen Savio was Drew Peterson's 3rd wife. She had 2 children with him, 2 sons. She and Drew had finalized a very bitter divorce. The kids were living with her, Thomas and Christopher. But Drew had visitation every other weekend.
With her children away at their father's, Kathleen is alone in the house on a Saturday night.
Kathleen was studying nursing. She really wanted to be a nurse, and she was on her way to getting a degree. She was ready to start a new life.
Moments after murdering his ex-wife, Drew returns home to his 4th wife, Stacy Peterson, and crawls into bed. The next evening, Drew Peterson goes through the motion of returning the kids to Kathleen's house, but there is no answer.
So they spent another night with him. Drew went back the next day. And that's when he got the locksmith to open the door and the neighbors to come over and take a look inside the house.
Upstairs, the neighbor makes a horrific discovery. Kathleen Savio lies lifeless in her bathtub.
It appeared that Kathleen was taking a bath and may have slipped and hit her head and become unconscious and drown in the bathtub.
Across town, Drew's son Stephen has no idea that something tragic has happened in his family.
I was at my friend's house. We used to get together and play cards, play dominoes, that kind of thing. And I get a call from my dad, and he says, Kathy died. You need to come home, be with the family. I instantly went into shock. I couldn't believe it. So I raced home, got pulled over on the way.
When Stephen arrives home, he's met by his father, Drew, and Drew's current wife, 21-year-old Stacy.
I get home and my dad and Stacy are in the kitchen, and he explained to me that he tried to bring the kids home after a weekend and nobody answered the door, and that she slipped and fell in the bathtub, hit her head, and she drowned. And it was just a total freak accident. When my dad told me what was going on, you could see he was upset. He generally looked upset. Tom and Chris were asleep at the time. So, like everybody, my first reaction was, those poor kids. Oh my God, my little brothers, their mom is now dead. How are we gonna tell those kids? Because this is awful.
No one in the Peterson family suspects foul play. But Stephen knows that his father has a troubled history with the women in his life.
The marriage between my mom and my father ended because my mother found out he was having an affair. So our first stepmother came into the picture, and then as time went on, it became, oh, she's horrible, and she's doing this and stealing from me. But of course we know, looking back now, that wasn't the case. It was a divorce, and he cheated on her too. I guess her 10 years were up, and he had another affair with Kathleen, and here comes our next stepmother. At one point, my dad and Kathy have my two little brothers. So that's when I think things kind of changed for us, just the whole dynamics of the family.
Young Stephen bonds with his new brothers, while Dad grows distant.
Well, he would give us guilt trips, and he makes us feel bad when we say we wanted to go do this or that. So then we would go out there on the weekends, and, well, me and Kathy are going out. That's what we were told. You're gonna watch the kids. So I became the babysitter a lot.
Over time, the relationship between Drew and Kathleen becomes hostile.
They'd butt heads over even stupid things they'd butt heads over, and that escalated things to where they were fighting. My dad owned a bar. When they got married, it became Kathy and my dad's bar. So one night there was a huge fight between my dad and Kathy. My dad's working the police job, and Kathy was at the bar. She was supposed to close it down. Kathy decided to come home early because she missed her kid. Now, my dad did not trust anybody with his money. His money was everything to him. So when Kathy came home and he came home, all hell broke loose. Me and my older brother were babysitting Tom, who was just a newborn at that time. And we were all in bed. And we got woken up to what sounded like a train coming through the house. And what sounded like he was losing his mind, going from room to room. There was glass breaking, there was tables getting flipped over. There was just a constant screaming, both ends. During that fight, my first instinct was to go get Tom out of his crib. And we brought him into bed with me, in my bedroom with me and my brother.
Police arrive at the house, but no charges are filed.
This is my dad's town, so obviously there's gonna be no, and again, I don't know if there was any physical or anything worth getting arrested for in the case of what the case was.
Drew Peterson knows how to manipulate the system to his advantage. On March 1st, 2004, investigators examine the site of Kathleen Savio's death. The Will County Coroner's Office completes an autopsy on her body 3 weeks later.
Initially, when Kathleen Savio died, the coroner's office reviewed it and decided that she had drowned. She was lying in the bathtub. She had a cut to the back of her head from when she had fallen.
A coroner's inquest is performed due to the unusual nature of Kathleen's death.
Under Illinois law, at the time Kathleen died, a coroner's jury had to sit and hear evidence in what's considered an unnatural death. So a healthy woman dying in her bathtub at home by what appeared to be a slip and fall was considered unnatural.
No one suspects Kathleen's ex-husband, Drew Peterson. He has an alibi, his young wife, Stacy.
The police came and sat down with Stacy and Drew, and they interviewed them together. And Stacy told the police that Drew had been home on the night of Kathleen's death.
All night?
Yes, sir.
At the time, everybody accepted that it was a freak accident, and that's what happened. And honestly, I didn't even give it a second thought. Never in a million years did I think, oh, maybe my dad had something to do with this or anything like that.
At the coroner's inquest, an Illinois State police officer who had investigated the case, a seasoned detective, testified that, in his opinion, there was no evidence of foul play and it was an accident.
After only 2 hours of deliberation, the coroner's jury reaches a verdict. Kathleen's death is ruled accidental. No charges are filed. For the moment, Drew Peterson has gotten away with murder. But all that changes when Stacy Peterson disappears.
This is a guy whose third wife died in a bathtub, a healthy woman with no known medical problems. And now another wife is missing? Is this guy killing his wives?
Months after finalizing a bitter divorce, Drew Peterson's ex-wife, Kathleen Savio, is found dead in her bathtub. Drew's son, Stephen, hears the terrible news from his father.
When my dad told me what was going on, you could see he was upset. He generally looked upset.
At the coroner's inquest, an Illinois State police officer who had investigated the case, a seasoned detective, testified that, in his opinion, there was no evidence of foul play and it was an accident.
With Kathleen dead, Drew's 21-year-old wife, Stacy, suddenly finds herself the mother of 4 young children.
It seems that as Drew Peterson got older and took on yet another wife, the wives got younger. By the time he met Stacy, there was a 30-year difference.
My dad told me that he was seeing someone else and that she was a little younger than him. Okay, didn't really say how young or how old she was, anything like that. He says, I have an apartment for her across town. Come by and let's meet her. First impression was I was in shock. I couldn't believe that she was younger than me. I was only 21, 22 at the time, and she was 18. So that was a pretty big shock. It was a lot to handle, actually. So when he's 48 and she's 18, 1, it didn't look right, and 2, morally, it was probably not right. I definitely didn't agree with it.
Like 1999's American Beauty, the age difference between Drew and Stacy is disturbing.
Finally, someone in the community sent an anonymous letter to Kathleen alerting her that her husband was seeing this teenager.
Drew and Kathleen divorce, and despite the age difference, Stacy and Drew marry within days.
It was a pattern with Drew Peterson. He ends one marriage and starts another, and the new marriage starts out on a good foot, and it did with Stacy. They enjoyed each other's company, they traveled, he bought her things.
Within 2 years, Drew and his young bride have 2 children of their own.
Even though there was an age gap, it was a normal relationship. There was happiness in the home. We had parties. Everything was just normal. As much as it doesn't make sense for that relationship to be normal, it was.
But Drew's marriage with Stacy mirrors his past relationships. The honeymoon phase is quickly followed by marital turmoil.
Stacy kind of confided in my wife that things weren't so great. She was fighting with my dad all the time. She wanted to move out.
What are you doing?
Drew Peterson was so controlling of Stacy. He would monitor her telephone.
You can't tell me
He wanted to know where she was at all times. He would stalk her and follow her. I mean, he was extremely jealous of her, accused her of doing things she wasn't doing.
On Sunday, October 28, 2007, 3.5 years after Kathleen Savio is found dead in her bathtub, Drew Peterson's fourth wife, Stacy Peterson, goes missing.
After Stacy went missing, her sister, when she couldn't locate her, did file a missing persons report, and the Bolingbrook police then turned the investigation over to the state police. Drew Peterson was a Bolingbrook police officer at the time Stacy went missing, so it wouldn't have been appropriate for them to investigate. Anytime someone goes missing and they're a spouse, the logical person to look at is the other spouse, especially when there's no other reason to believe anyone else would want this person missing.
My dad told me Stacy left him for another guy, and she was going to go on a vacation, and she'd be back and to deal with him when she got back. She'd deal with everything. When he told me that, she left him, your first reaction is, okay, well, about time. It wasn't shocking. It wasn't a surprise. Everybody in the family knew that it was coming.
But state investigators find Drew's story suspicious.
Stacy Peterson was a very young mother, but she was a great mother, and she doted on her own 2 children and Thomas and Chris, Kathleen's 2 children, like her own. She never would have abandoned those 4 children.
Investigators take a closer look into Drew's past and find that he has a history of deception.
In 1978, Drew was assigned to the Metropolitan Area Narcotics Squad. Undercover work requires a special kind of person, somebody who can carry on a con, be another person, be deceitful, because that's what you're doing. You've taken on a new identity, and you're making others believe that you are someone you're not.
He assisted with other agencies and was basically had to be a totally different person, and he was actually really good at it.
While working undercover, Peterson shows a dark side.
He kind of went rogue, and he became a bad cop. He became a dirty cop. He started taking bribes. He started doing things that his superiors did not know about. That got him in trouble.
After working 7 years undercover, Drew Peterson is fired from the Bolingbrook PD.
During that time, I remember, we had to go move. He lost his house. We had to go live with my grandparents. And then eventually he ended up winning his job back.
Well, Drew Peterson knows the system, and he knows what it takes to prove allegations. And there just wasn't enough proof.
Now that his fourth wife has disappeared, Drew is prepared to face the scrutiny.
The police obtained a search warrant for Drew Peterson's house, but he got tipped off about it.
Drew Peterson's friends at the police department warn him that detectives are on their way to his door, so he takes action.
He showed up at my house, and he had 3 rifles. And he told me, these are my favorites. Now that she's reported as a missing person, they're gonna come search the house. He didn't want anything to happen to these guns.
Drew also writes his son a check for approximately $200,000, drawn from a line of credit.
Once they did a search warrant of his house, is when he called me up and said, go deposit it, put it in your account. If anything happens to me, use that to raise the kids.
He put Stephen in a very bad position because arguably he was starting to bring Stephen into his little criminal circle.
If Drew did kill Stacy, then Stephen could be implicated as an accessory to murder.
Never thought twice about it. Never thought it was anything shady. Looking back, I know that he was probably preparing for his, if he were to get arrested, for bail money. Because now we could, if it's a certain amount, we could post that bail now. So did I felt lied to a little bit? Maybe. I feel like I was kind of thrown into there a little bit now. But at the time, it was just, you're thinking, just, it's there to raise, to raise us.
Stephen may believe in his father, but Drew Peterson is about to destroy his family, incite a media circus, and expose a brutal murder.
After Stacy disappeared, law enforcement took another look at Kathleen's death 3.5 years earlier, and they became very concerned.
When Drew Peterson falls under police suspicion in the 2007 disappearance of his young wife, Stacy, he turns to his son, Stephen, for help.
He showed up at my house, and he had 3 rifles. And he told me, you know, these are my favorites.
Drew Peterson, I think, reasonably suspected they were coming to check his house with a search warrant and thought that they would take his weapons that he had, lawful weapons. So he gave the weapons to his son.
Investigators execute a search warrant of Drew Peterson's home and discover ammunition for rifles that are nowhere to be found. Drew admits the rifles are at his son Stephen's house. Investigators want the firearms taken into evidence, so they reach out to Stephen.
They called me up and said, hey, could you come in on Friday, interview with us, and bring those guns? Sure, absolutely. I answered every question they had, and it, kind of left the meeting, like everything was fine.
But Drew's actions cast a shadow over his son.
I would definitely think my dad would never put me in any position where it would ruin my life in any way. But people kind of looked at me like I was hiding something or I was, helping him out.
Stephen struggles with the accusations that are being leveled against his father.
Anytime something major like this happens, the first stage is denial, that you can't expect ever that your family member would be capable of murder. You just thought Stacy was gone, she left him. And eventually things would work out and play out and, we'd be back to normal eventually.
But as time goes on, the investigation into Stacy's disappearance hits a dead end.
They did a massive search for Stacy and they can't find her. So they can't say for sure that she's deceased or if she just ran away somewhere.
With suspicion against Drew mounting, the family of Drew's 3rd wife, Kathleen, pressures the authorities to revisit her death from 3 years earlier.
I knew that he killed her, and I wasn't going to ever let go. I was there from the beginning for my sister, and I'm here to the end.
The state attorney said, I'm going to take another look at Kathleen's death. He wasn't in office at the time she died. And so that's what they did. And they found some surprising things about Kathleen's death that were overlooked before.
The state's attorney in the prosecution for Kathleen's death had a theory that the Illinois State Police had not done their job properly, so they had missed evidence.
One revealing issue is the unsettled nature of Drew and Kathleen's divorce.
Kathleen Savio was Drew Peterson's 3rd wife, so that was his 3rd divorce and the 2nd involving children.
Merry Christmas.
Say it's 1996.
And it's Christmas. Chris is 2, and Tommy's gonna be 4.
And Mommy's how old?
She and Drew still had to finalize the financial distribution of the property.
A divorce wasn't finalized, but they were able to get what's called a bifurcated divorce. Now that is, they are legally divorced, but the property has not been settled.
Mommy, I've never seen you more radiant. Mommy, I love you.
It's a miracle we made it this far.
I love you, Mommy.
An unhappy Drew stands to lose a lot to his ex-wife.
So it appeared that Kathleen was going to get custody of the boys, the house, half of Drew's pension, and also half of other businesses that they had on the side.
Kathleen knows she has a target on her back.
She told her sisters that she feared he would kill her and make it look like an accident, that she would never live to see everything finalized in their divorce.
After Kathleen dies, the finances are settled in Drew's favor.
2 weeks after Kathleen died, Drew produced a will, a handwritten will that he said was Kathleen's, and it was dated from the late 1990s. Now, Kathleen, mind you, had told people, more than one, that she didn't have a will. But Drew's like, yeah, she did. Drew was going to lose a lot if they had actually gone through with the property settlement aspect of the divorce. But with her dead, and with this will he produced, he got it all.
Investigators also review the alibi Drew provided for the night of Kathleen's death.
In an unusual move, the police talk to Stacy at home and allow Drew to be present for the interview. That is not protocol. You talk to people individually. Drew sat right next to her, even answering some of the questions himself. I can't emphasize enough how inappropriate that was.
A review of the forensic evidence is also revealing.
Because Kathleen's death was deemed accidental, and at the time, police didn't really see signs of foul play, they didn't treat the scene like a crime. I mean, it wasn't secured. Drew Peterson was allowed to walk through the area. Not enough photos were taken. It wasn't preserved and processed like a crime scene. So vital evidence arguably was lost.
Investigators make the shocking decision to exhume Kathleen's body.
For them to dig it up, obviously it was getting serious. But again, you still never thought anything was gonna come of it.
When Drew Peterson learns police are about to dig up his ex-wife, he appears unfazed.
My dad never expressed concern about the Kathy case. Through the whole thing, he was never seemed worried. You know, never really seemed concerned. Was always very confident that everything was just gonna blow over and life was gonna go back to normal.
I think the authorities decided to exhume Kathleen because there was so much media attention that they felt like they had to go reinvestigate.
While investigators wait for new autopsy results, the media swarms Drew Peterson's house.
One morning that week, I was laying in bed, and I get a call from a friend, and he says, "Hey, is that your dad on TV?" I said, "Hold on a second." Flip it on, sure enough, they're camped out in front of his house. You know, it was just nonstop after that. You know, it was like every news cycle, there was some story about him, which sparked my dad to feel the need to defend himself on national TV.
I understand very well. I mean, the media's done everything they can to keep me in a position looking guilty.
Drew Peterson went from somebody who we were talking about, but we weren't hearing from, to a man who was in front of the cameras constantly.
Generators would start at like 5 in the morning in front of his house, and they would go all the way until about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And it was like that nonstop. So you couldn't really go visit him without a swarm of reporters and cameras.
He seemed to revel in the attention. It seemed like he liked being on the radio and on TV, and he didn't shy away from any cameras.
My father definitely reached celebrity status, and even more so in his own mind. He was on every news station, he was in every newspaper, every magazine. It was everywhere, 24/7.
While Drew Peterson relishes the media spotlight, the attention has a devastating effect on the rest of the family.
My little brother and sister had to deal with so much because little, grade schoolers, they don't have that filter to turn it off, and they didn't know. I don't think they realized what they were saying. They would pick on them in school. They would say, "Your daddy killed your mom," all the time. And I did try to protect them from a lot of things.
Stephen's life is thrown into turmoil.
I lost my job over this. I was kind of thrown into the whole mix, because I wouldn't tell my story to anybody, people kind of looked at me like I was hiding something or I was, helping him out. My former chief at the time decided to bring internal charges, not criminal charges, but internal charges for work, saying that I impeded the investigation. Obviously, none of that ever happened, but I lost my job because of it. Everything just kind of snowballed, it just kind of fell apart. It was a lot to take, it was very stressful, developed severe anxiety. Even leaving the house was a struggle. So yeah, I started, using anxiety medication and drinking with that, and drinking a lot. You neglect your wife, you neglect your family. Looking back, it was probably the biggest mistake in my life. Just taking her for granted, not handling the situation. To be honest, I'm surprised I'm still here. There's times where you just want to give up.
While Stephen's life falls apart, investigators complete their re-examination of Kathleen Savio's body. And the results change everything. Stephen Peterson is shocked when suspicion falls on his father, Drew, in the 2004 death of Drew's ex-wife, Kathleen Savio.
Next thing you know, they're exhuming Kathy's body. They're really looking at it now. You know, for them to dig it up and all that kind of stuff, that was obviously was getting serious.
When the new autopsy is complete, the results are telling.
At that autopsy, it was learned that she had a lot of bruises on her, and they weren't old bruises. They were more consistent with being recent, close in time to her death, including the laceration on the back of her head. So the conclusion was that she died from a homicide, death at the hands of another.
Will County State Police arrest Drew Peterson for Kathleen's murder and hold him on a $20 million bond. Stephen takes in his 4 young siblings as turmoil engulfs their family.
At this point, my dad was arrested. I had a newborn. Now I have 4 more kids. I'm losing my job. Everything just kind of snowballed, just kind of fell apart.
With Drew incarcerated awaiting trial, the media attention continues. The film Drew Peterson, Untouchable is produced, airing 6 months before proceedings begin. As the trial finally gets underway, Stephen stands by his father.
Never in a million years did I think he was going to be convicted for murdering Kathy. You know, I thought they were grasping at straws. There was no evidence whatsoever. They couldn't point to when it happened, how it happened, who did it. You know, they couldn't link him to it. So for all that time, you just, you know, this is going to blow over.
The state of Illinois believes they have evidence proving that Kathleen's death was a homicide and that Drew Peterson had a financial motive. But there's a hole in the prosecution's case.
They had no evidence that Drew Peterson had done anything. They had no physical evidence at all.
The prosecution's case is further weakened because Drew Peterson's 4th wife, Stacy, gave him an alibi at the time of Kathleen's death.
Go ahead, tell him, honey.
When Stacy was interviewed by the police, Drew made sure she was his alibi for that night because he sat right next to her during that interview.
Now, Stacy's disappearance makes it impossible to refute her claim. Until a new witness steps forward, Stacy's minister, Reverend Neil Shorey.
Reverend Shorey had been providing marital counseling to Drew and Stacy and met with Stacy individually at a coffee shop in Bolingbrook. He said that she had confided in him, that she had lied to the police.
Reverend Shorey told the police that about 2 months before she disappeared, Stacy met with him and told him that Drew killed Kathleen. Reverend Shorey did not report what Stacy told him to the authorities because she didn't want him to. She feared for her life, and he didn't want to endanger her.
The Reverend's powerful testimony comes with a catch. It's hearsay, and therefore inadmissible. But a new hearsay law enacted in the wake of Stacy's disappearance might give prosecutors the ammunition they need. Named after Drew Peterson, it is dubbed Drew's Law.
So they passed Drew's Law so they could prosecute Drew Peterson so they could get in certain evidence.
Drew's Law was, I felt, was dangerous, you know. You can't change the law just to get one person because it's going to open up a lot of floodgates and have a lot of, anybody could say anything about anybody, and now they're going to let it in. You know, that was scary.
With third-party witness statements now permissible, Reverend Shorey is called to testify for the prosecution.
Reverend Shorey told the police that about 2 months before she disappeared, Stacy told him that the night Kathleen died,
Drew?
She woke up at home and Drew wasn't there. And then he came home and he was wearing all black. And he was carrying a bag with women's clothes, which he put in the washing machine, and they weren't her clothes. And then he coached her to say that he was with her all night. If she's questioned about it, he was with her all night.
Prosecutors put forward a new theory of Kathleen's death.
Prosecutors believe that Drew Peterson broke into Kathleen's house and surprised her while she was home alone, and that he assaulted her. That he drowned her in the toilet. And then put in the bathtub and made to look as though she drowned in the bathtub.
The state's attorney then presents new evidence that rocks the court: a history of domestic violence calls.
After Drew moved out and in with Stacy, the police were constantly being called. Those two, Kathleen and Drew, were constantly at each other. There was a time when he broke into her house. It was July 2002. He held Kathleen down, pointing a knife at her. And he said, "Where do you want it?" And she said, "In the head." But he ultimately couldn't kill the mother of his children. At least at that point.
Fearing for her life, Kathleen reaches out for help.
Kathleen waited 4 months after Drew terrorized her with the knife on the stairs before writing a letter to an assistant state's attorney, basically begging for help. In the letter, Kathleen said, "He knows how to manipulate the system, and his next step is to take away the children or kill me instead."
Drew Peterson's children watch as witness after witness conveys the harsh reality of the monster their father really is.
I never really had that aha moment of when I thought he was guilty. But now Stacy's not coming home ever. You know, how could they have not found her by now? You just kind of, you kind of put it all together, and you just kind of realize that, maybe he did. Maybe he's not that person that you thought he was, and, he could be guilty.
Despite the strong testimony about Drew and Kathleen's troubled relationship, the lack of physical evidence has the defense feeling confident.
Our case was rock solid. They had presented no evidence that tied Drew to this scene, whether you thought it was a murder or an accident.
Then, the defense makes a shocking move and calls divorce attorney Harry Smith to the stand.
For some reason that I will never understand, the lead defense attorney decided to call Harry Smith and had Harry Smith testify.
His unexpected testimony turns the trial on its head. The sensational trial of Drew Peterson for the murder of his ex-wife, Kathleen Savio, is underway. Drew's son, Stephen, avoids the courtroom as witness after witness paints a dark picture of his father. But with no physical evidence tying Drew to the murder, the defense is feeling confident. Then, the lead defense attorney makes the surprising move of calling divorce lawyer Harry Smith to the stand.
Harry Smith is a matrimonial attorney in Illinois, and he represented Kathleen Savio in her divorce from Drew Peterson. Well, he was contacted by Stacy not long before Stacy disappeared. She wanted him to represent her.
For some reason that I will never understand, the lead defense attorney decided to call Harry Smith and had Harry Smith testify.
Now, they expected Harry Smith to get up there and say that Stacy wanted custody of the 4 kids and would say anything in order to make sure she got those kids. She'd even lie to make sure.
Do you remember his ex-wife?
But instead, Harry said that Stacy told him Drew killed Kathleen. That was a bombshell in the courtroom. I mean, everybody was like, "Huh? Are you kidding me?" They've just elicited on the stand the defense in their own case that the missing wife said Drew killed Kathleen. This was not good for the defense.
But Drew Peterson's defense team has one last witness. Drew's own son, Thomas Peterson.
The defense called one of Drew Peterson's 5 sons, Thomas, who was Kathleen's son. He supported his father, and he said that no one knows his father the way he does, and that he knows for a fact his father could never hurt his mother.
Tom definitely wanted to help my dad. I mean, we all did, you know? It's kind of hard to explain that you almost don't care what he did or didn't do. You know, it's your dad. You know, you don't want him sitting in prison.
As the trial comes to an end and the jury begins deliberations, Drew's children wait for the news that will determine the future of their family.
The first thing I see is a tease for the verdict on the news. Drew Peterson verdict is in. It's coming up after this break. All right, you know, this is years of waiting and wondering and not knowing what's going to happen.
In a unanimous decision, the jurors convict Peterson of first-degree murder in the death of his ex-wife, Kathleen Savio. He's sentenced to 38 years in prison.
That was, you know, that was years of emotions came out of me that time. You know, it was hard to take, you know, because now not only is your dad gone, you know, you're losing one of your dad, your friend, you know, these kids are permanent now. These kids don't have any parents, you know. Now I'm it, and this is my life now. There's no, you know, there's no other way.
With Drew Peterson's murder conviction, his children must accept their father is a killer.
Growing up, my dad was my hero. You know, he led me in the right direction of careers. I wanted to be just like him, and you know, he was a great guy, and obviously that all changed. Even though, you know, I stuck by him I'll still stand by, you know, he's still my dad, but I'm not gonna bury my head in the sand and pretend like nothing happened and that he didn't put us through all this.
At times, the struggle is overwhelming.
You have those dark days where you just want to end it, you know, eat your gun. But, you know, I would never put that pain, because now, you know, I'd just be putting that pain on my daughter and my siblings now, you know, my other kids. So, because of that, you know, I fought through it.
Stephen comes through the pain with a new sense of purpose.
It took a while to realize where I fit in all this and, you know, what was my role in life, but then you kind of wake up one day and you realize this is my role to give those kids a better life. Thomas graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's doing really well for himself. That kid works harder than anybody you'll meet. You know, he's going places. Chris, he's doing well. He's ready to start his life. Sooner or later, he'll find something and, you know, really hit it. Anthony plays hockey. One day he wants to get to the NHL and become a professional referee. Lacey, there's not a person that goes by, you know, doesn't have something good to say about her and how positive she is and what a sweet girl she is, and she's doing really well. My daughter, she's the light of my life, and she's everything. She's my little princess.
While Drew Peterson remains locked up in prison for Kathleen's murder, his son Stephen and all his children have found joy again.
Through this whole thing, I definitely realized people have it a lot worse than me. I never wanted pity from anybody. I never wanted a handout. I just want those kids to have the best life possible, and if I could give that to them, I'll, you know, happily do it.
After the trial, Drew's law was repealed by the state of Illinois, even though Stacy Peterson was still considered a missing person. Richard Beasley has the world fooled.
He convinced some very smart people that he was actually trying to do good.
But his daughter learns that it was all a lie.
In reality, it was all just fake. It was a double life.
When his con is exposed, a desperate Beasley turns to murder.
The FBI soon realized that they had a serial killer on their hands.
Luring his victims online, he becomes the infamous Craigslist killer. And his daughter, Tanya, is forced to face the devastating truth.
Growing up, I had this idea of him getting out and being this awesome father figure. And then this idea of him even being a decent human being was ripped away.
In the internet age, few things are more terrifying than the unknown predators who lurk online. Richard Beasley is one of those predators, using the internet to lure the vulnerable for his own twisted gain. His vicious crimes devastate his daughter Tanya, destroy the life of a young family friend, and shock the community that trusted him. In 1989, 30-year-old biker Richard Beasley is paroled from a Texas prison after serving 4 years for burglary. He returns home to Akron, Ohio, marries fellow biker Tina, and in 1993 becomes the proud father of a baby girl, Tanya. For the first 3 years of Tanya's life, Richard is a working man and a doting father.
The earliest memories I have of him and my mom and us as a family is us going to Rolling Acres Mall. My favorite thing was to throw coins in the fountain and make wishes on them. Of course, thinking as a kid it would come true. We would go to the zoo, we would do art together, we'd play video games. So there were definitely a lot of positives in the memories that I have with him.
Richard's wife, Tina, wants to put the past behind them.
My mom no longer wanted to be a part of the motorcycle lifestyle, but my dad decided that he wanted to stay in. He promised my mom that he was on the straight and narrow and that he was bringing home a legitimate paycheck. But in reality, it was all just fake. It was a double life.
Like Walter White in Breaking Bad, Beasley has a secret criminal life.
He was dealing drugs, he was breaking into houses, and he was selling firearms to criminals, basically.
My mom had no idea what was going on until the ATF came to our door.
An Ohio judge sentences Beasley to 7 years in prison for burglary and dealing illegal weapons. In prison, he turns over a new leaf and finds God.
After my father was released from prison when I was in middle school, he had decided that he was going to take the right path this time. He really took his religion to the next level. He was a Christian, and he became an ordained chaplain at one of the local churches that he had volunteered at. I felt as though that was his first official step in changing his life around.
He pledges to spread the word of God and serve the needy.
He would embrace the downtrodden, try to help those who had made mistakes, who had suffered through abuse or addiction issues. He came to be well respected in the community, someone who preached a Christian life and who did as Jesus Christ did by helping those who were less fortunate.
One of those less fortunate is a neighborhood boy named Brogan Rafferty, who Beasley has taken under his wing since the tender age of 8.
Brogan Rafferty came from a fractured home. His father was a biker. His mother was basically a drug addict.
At first, I was a little bit jealous of Brogan's relationship with my dad and the fact that he spent so much time with him. But I grew to accept it. I knew he needed that mentor and that positive figure. You could tell Brogan idolized him in a sense. He would wait and just kind of dote on his every word.
Life is good again for Richard and his daughter until tragedy strikes.
My father, when he first got out, got a job driving a trash truck. And when they were driving on the highway, they were in an accident. He had broken his sternum and snapped his Achilles tendon. And after that, he wasn't quite the same.
The collision leaves Beasley with severe head, neck, and spinal cord injuries. The painkillers he is prescribed eventually lead to an addiction.
After my father started abusing the pain pills, there was a very drastic change in his personality. He was very quick to anger. He would kind of snap when something upset him. he just had a whole different demeanor about him.
With his addiction kept secret, Beasley's reputation as a pillar of the community remains intact. In 2009, he uses a financial settlement from his accident to open a halfway house for paroled prisoners and eventually former prostitutes.
Judges, defense attorneys, even prosecutors, they all believe Richard Beasley was a renewed man. He would advocate for the defendants, the prostitutes, and the drug addicts, and he could convince a judge to release them into his custody, into his care, into his halfway house. There was something about Richard Beasley that people liked. He was a salesman. He sold himself, and he convinced some very smart people that he was actually trying to do good.
As Tanya enters high school, she adopts her father's desire to help those less fortunate.
I wanted to start it off on a positive note, so him and I started this charity. We ended up raising a couple $1,000s for the local group home, and he was behind me every step of the way. It was a defining moment where I kind of decided what I wanted to do with my life, and he helped me figure it out.
But Tanya soon realizes that something about her father seems off.
My freshman year of high school, I had gotten my first boyfriend. He had had kind of a shady past, but had also recently turned his life around. My father asked if my boyfriend would like to come over and help him work on the house. And I thought maybe being around my father would be a positive influence for him. And then over time, it just kind of got a little weird. It got to the point where he would come over without me being there. Or I'd call my boyfriend to see what he was doing, thinking he was at home and he was at my dad's. I could tell that something more was going on there.
At the tender age of 16, Tanya learns once again that her father's life is a lie.
I had been hanging out with my dad, and he was not tech savvy whatsoever. One of the things that he always had me do was help him clean out his voicemails. And I'd found a recent voicemail from my boyfriend talking about the drugs that he had been selling for him.
Pious Richard Beasley has been dealing drugs to the neighborhood youth. Discovering the brutal truth devastates young Tanya.
His choices cost me a lot of my friendships. Just trying to walk down the hallways in school and talk to my friends. I could no longer decipher who was my friend because they enjoyed being around me or because they were buying or selling drugs for my father. It caused me to have a lot of distrust in people. That really changed my relationship with my father. I went from seeing him as this nurturing, loving father to seeing him as the opposite. And it was hard. It hurt really bad. It just made me question everything about the man.
As Richard's lies unravel, the truth about his halfway house is exposed.
After my father started doing his street ministry, he started bringing around girlfriends when we would hang out. And then it turned into them being tenants of his house. The more that came around, I started to notice something was up. They weren't always modestly clothed. And it wasn't until one of them had gotten me a coat, and it was a fur coat, and my mom had made a smart remark when I showed it to her about how she couldn't believe that he had given me one of his hooker's coats. And that's when I put two and two together, that they weren't just recovering addicts, they were actually prostitutes.
Have you got something for me?
Richard Beasley was really a wolf. I mean, he was preying on these women, keeping them high, keeping them addicted, and meanwhile sending them out to service men in the community in sexual ways, and even himself. The women weren't going to tell. They felt threatened. He would tell them that he would go to the judges who listened to Richard Beasley, and he would send the girls back to prison. So he kept them intimidated, he kept them in fear, and he kept them addicted. At some point, the women had had enough of Richard Beasley, and they called law enforcement.
Beasley's halfway house is exposed as a front for prostitution and drugs.
In December of 2010, the Akron police executed a search warrant on a residence that Richard was living in, and they discovered chemicals used for the manufacture of drugs, as well as some prescription medication and marijuana and he was ultimately charged with drug trafficking as well as compelling prostitution.
Once these horrific stories emerged, his reputation just went south. Judges felt betrayed. Prosecutors felt betrayed.
With new charges hanging in the balance and parole violations for the offense in Texas, Richard is facing decades of prison time with no hope for release.
This investigation really put Richard Beasley in a box. He became very desperate.
My father would always tell me if anything ever happened and he had to go to prison again, he just wouldn't. He said he would never go back again.
Beasley comes up with a desperate plan that ultimately leads to murder. Before he becomes known as the Craigslist killer, Richard Beasley is a pillar of the community. His daughter, Tanya, is proud of his devotion to helping the poor.
When my dad first opened the halfway house, I believed that his intentions had been pure.
But in reality, the halfway house appears to be a front for prostitution and drugs.
He was preying on these women, keeping them high, keeping them addicted, and meanwhile sending them out to service men in the community in sexual ways, and even himself.
When his hookers report him, Richard is arrested and charged with drug trafficking and compelling prostitution.
Richard Beasley had been in jail for a number of months, and he was finally able to make bond in July of 2011. He had a trial date coming up in September and was due to return back to court in August.
When I heard my father was going back to prison, I actually viewed it as being a positive thing because he could no longer disappoint us as his family. At least in prison, he would shape up and we would have a relationship that was honest.
Desperate to avoid more prison time, Richard Beasley enlists the help of Brogan Rafferty, the son of a family friend.
As my father and I's relationship dissipated, he became closer with Brogan.
Since taking him under his wing as a child, Beasley has become a father figure to Brogan.
It went from Brogan being this kind, gentle, nice boy to him being more of a very assertive, dominant kind of person. Our conversations kind of took a twist and it became about fighting and drugs, and my dad was encouraging that violent nature in Brogan.
We're in this together. You got to help me get out of it.
With Brogan's help, Beasley devises a sinister plan.
He was a desperate man, and Richard Beasley decided at this point he had no other alternative but to disappear and to take on somebody else's identity.
Like the talented Mr. Ripley, Beasley plans to kill a victim and assume their identity. With Brogan in tow, Beasley begins cruising the streets of Akron looking for his target.
Richard Beasley, as desperate as he was, needed a new identity. He and Brogan Rafferty started cruising along areas of Akron where the homeless hang out, looking for somebody whose identity he can assume. Eventually, he came upon Ralph Geiger.
Hey, buddy. How's it going?
With few friends and family to miss him, Geiger is the perfect mark.
Sadly, Ralph Geiger was the perfect foil for Richard Beasley. He was in his 50s. He was hit hard by the recession.
You interested in a little work? I'm always looking for good work, man.
Richard Beasley offered Ralph Geiger $300 a week to take care of his land, take care of some livestock down there, and essentially he would have the use of a 2-bedroom trailer in a very secluded area about 100 miles south of Akron.
Ralph Geiger was desperate, and this job that Richard Beasley offered him seemed like the job of a lifetime, the break that he needed.
Hop in.
On August 8th, 2011, Ralph Geiger steps into Richard Beasley's car.
Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty decided to take Ralph to Southern Ohio under the guise that they're going to tour the property and show Ralph where he's going to live. They arrive, it's deserted, and Richard Beasley made up some excuse that they had to start walking. He asked Ralph to help him find these wild coyotes that were in the area. They walked into the woods away.
You know what? I think this might be the wrong way.
They turned around, and Ralph Geiger now led the way. As Ralph Geiger was standing in front of him, Richard Beasley pulled out his gun, pulled the trigger, and killed him, execution style.
Go get a shovel.
As Ralph Geiger's lying there dead, Richard Beasley completed his crime. He took Ralph's wallet and took out his Social Security card and driver's license. He got what he came for, a new identity.
Because of his previous injuries, Beasley relies on Brogan Rafferty to do the heavy lifting.
Richard Beasley was seriously injured in a car accident, and as a result of that, had a lot of injuries, and he used Brogan to assist him with this murder.
Brogan's the muscle of this operation, so to speak, and it was left to him to dig the grave. He didn't dig it very deep, but it was enough for them to drag Ralph Geiger's body over there, lay it in a shallow grave, toss some leaves over it, and then just walk away. According to Brogan, once they got back to the car, Richard Beasley pulls out a knife and makes a pointed threat. He says, "I know your mother, I know your sister, I will kill them if you say anything."
Armed with a new Social Security card, Richard Beasley takes on a new name and becomes 56-year-old Ralph Geiger.
Once he got what he wanted, Richard Beasley left his own identity in Southern Ohio and drove to Akron a new man, so to speak.
Richard Beasley was due to return back to court in August. Richard missed that August court date, and as a result, the judge issued a warrant for his arrest.
My dad had left me a voicemail with a contact number and address that he would be at if I needed to talk to him. And I deleted it because I had no desire to keep in contact with him. But I didn't realize that he was giving me that info because he was on the run. And knowing what I know now, I wish I hadn't deleted the voicemail.
For weeks, Beasley's plan seems to work.
Using Ralph Geiger's identity and Social Security number, Richard Beasley was able to get an apartment. He was able to get a job.
But there's one part of his old life Beasley can't leave behind.
Unfortunately for Beasley, this job requires some physical labor. But because of his car accident, physical labor and Richard Beasley don't like each other. Because of the physical toll this took, Richard Beasley didn't last long in this job. It was probably something like 2 weeks before he quit.
With his back to the wall, Beasley decides to kill again. This time for money.
The criminal world was not scary to him. He was not intimidated easily. He saw an opportunity to continue to deceive people and make a lot of money doing it.
Once again, Beasley uses help from his unwitting daughter to carry out his nefarious plan.
When he first got out of prison, he was kind of in shock by the technology and the ways that it had advanced. One of the things that fascinated him the most was the internet. He loved the fact that he could have all the knowledge he wanted right at his fingertips. But he just wasn't quite sure how to do anything else with it, like using Craigslist.
We just click this button right here.
So if I wanted to sell something?
And when he first got his halfway house, he had been given a lot of furniture donations for it. And he wanted to sell what he didn't use on Craigslist. That way the proceeds could still go towards the house.
That sounds easy enough.
Yeah, I think
you think I can handle that?
He asked me to create a Craigslist account so that he could sell the furniture, but I didn't know what would come of that later.
Using the pseudonym Jack, Richard Beasley posts an ad on Craigslist with the same offer he used to lure Ralph Geiger.
It read, "Wanted, caretaker for farm. Simply watch over a 688-acre patch of hilly farmland and feed a few cows. You get $300 a week and a nice 2-bedroom trailer. Someone older and single preferred."
You got to remember, at this time when Richard Beasley posted this ad, the economy was tanking. Unemployment was high. People, especially guys in their mid-50s, were extremely desperate for work. So the response to this ad was phenomenal. Over 100 guys applied for it.
One of the applicants is 51-year-old divorcee David Pauly. Down on his luck, Pauly's lost his job and is sleeping on his brother's couch.
David Pauly, as it turned out, was a perfect candidate for Richard Beasley's ruse. He was middle-aged, 50s, unemployed, not married, no kids.
David Pauly was attractive because he had a bunch of tools that he put in a U-Haul and had a lot of possessions that he brought with him when he responded to the ad.
One of the first things that David Pauly did after getting the job was to tell his sister about it. He felt that, Richard Beasley was a preacher and that there was some divine intervention going on here, that God was actually helping him turn his life around through Richard Beasley.
On October 23, 2011, David Pauly drives to Ohio to meet with his new employer.
Mr. Pauly met Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty in a restaurant and was asked to get in the car with them. At that point, they drove out into this secluded area near where Richard said the farm was that Pauly would be the caretaker for. He was then asked to get out of the car and walk into the woods.
According to Brogan, once the car stopped, he got out, he answered nature's call. And while he's gone, he hears the pop, pop, pop. He came running and saw David Pauly lying on the ground dead in his cowboy hat hanging from a tree.
While Beasley rifles through his victim's pockets, Brogan Rafferty prepares to dispose of the body.
There was a grave that had been dug by Brogan Rafferty. This was almost exactly the same MO as the first victim, Ralph Geiger.
For the second time, Richard Beasley is getting away with murder.
Well, once David Pauly was killed, Richard Beasley then stole whatever life possessions that the poor guy had. A train set, some tools, a tackle box, Christmas decorations. They even sold the guy's pickup truck. This score for Richard Beasley amounted to a couple $1,000. But you gotta remember, he's addicted to painkillers. Those are expensive. And Richard Beasley blew through this money in a matter of 2 weeks. And again, he was desperate. He had to go out and get more money to feed his own addiction.
Beasley once again turns to Craigslist to find his next victim. 49-year-old Scott Davis from South Carolina.
He fit the profile, single, loosely attached. It was an opportunity for Scott Davis not only to get a job, but also to move back to Ohio and be closer to his mom.
2 weeks after killing David Pauly, Beasley and Brogan meet with Davis at a local breakfast diner.
During this so-called job interview, Richard Beasley was sizing up Scott Davis, trying to determine exactly how much of a bounty this guy was going to bring him to make his killing worth it.
Scott had a landscaping business, so he had tools, landscaping equipment, a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. He brought a lot of belongings with him.
Beasley is pleased with what he hears. He and Brogan begin the routine that has already claimed the lives of 2 other men.
Scott Davis is in the car with Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty. And as they approach a very secluded area in the woods, Richard Beasley tells Scott Davis that they need to stop and retrieve some equipment in the woods in order to repair the road leading up to the farm. Richard tells Davis that they're lost and they need to turn around.
But I think we're in the wrong area.
At that point, Scott Davis turns around and Richard is following behind him. And Scott Davis hears a sound that he recognizes as a gun being cocked. He turns around and realizes that Richard Beasley is pointing a gun at him.
But then Beasley's plans come undone. Ex-con turned street preacher Richard Beasley's fall from grace has led to a rift with his teenage daughter, Tanya.
Growing up, I had this idea of him getting out and being this awesome father figure and having this strong relationship with him, and I got a taste of that. But as he started reverting back to his old lifestyle and his life of crime, it kind of crushed that idea. I was extremely hurt, and I kind of turned my emotions off. He's going away, so don't get attached.
In order to avoid jail time for drug and parole violations, Beasley turns to murder, luring men through a job ad on Craigslist.
After killing Ralph Geiger, assuming his identity and his lifestyle, Beasley misses court, and he then goes on to kill David Pauly.
Now Beasley is poised to kill again. This time, it's Scott Davis.
As Richard Beasley and Scott Davis walk into the woods, Richard tells Davis that they're lost and they need to turn around.
I think we may have to go back.
At that point, Richard is following behind Scott Davis.
Scott Davis hears this click and turns around and realizes that he's about to be killed. A gunshot goes off. He's wounded in the arm, and then he takes off into the woods, running literally for his life.
As he's running, Richard Beasley fires off several shots. He misses. Davis was able to get away from Beasley and escape into the woods.
What just happened? Get in the car.
At that point, Richard Beasley goes back to the road, and it's back in the car with Brogan Rafferty, and they are searching for Scott Davis. Richard tells Brogan Rafferty that if he sees Davis, he should run over him with the car. For 7 hours, Davis is either hiding or running through the woods trying to seek assistance. And eventually, he finds a house that he approaches and knocks on the door. The people in the house very reluctantly open the door. They see this person standing there with dirt and blood all over him, and he convinces them to call 911.
Sheriff Hanum's office. Hey, yes, Hanum. We just had a gentleman come up to our front door. He claims he's been shot. He's got some blood on him.
Once law enforcement arrived, the sheriff was talking to Scott Davis, and the story that he was telling them just seemed so out of this world that they didn't believe him. They thought it was a drug deal gone bad or something. And Scott Davis pulls out the Craigslist ad and says, here's proof. He showed him the actual ad, and it was at that point that the sheriff finally believed what Scott Davis was saying was actually the truth.
The media gets wind of Scott Davis's shocking story.
The local media started to hear of his horrific story, and the media attention really started to focus in on what was happening at that farm.
During the time that the police are investigating Scott Davis's allegations about being shot in the woods, the police get a phone call from David Pauly's sister.
David Pauly's sister stumbled upon Scott Davis's story, and it was at that point the similarities were so striking, she realized that her brother was probably a victim, just as Scott Davis was.
Pauly's sister tells Akron police her brother responded to a similar Craigslist ad and then went missing.
Law enforcement realized that he may also be a victim, and it was at that point that they took cadaver dogs to the site and started searching the area, and that's when they discovered David Pauly's body. Beasley and Brogan didn't do a real great job of burying him. The grave was not very deep, it was very shallow.
When the police discovered David Pauly's body, it was partially decomposed, and in very close proximity to that was a freshly dug grave that police believe was meant for Scott Davis. And at this point, for the first time, authorities realized that they had a serial killer on their hands.
Ohio police immediately call in the FBI.
Because victims were being lured across state lines, because there was cell phone tower information and computer information that they needed to search, the FBI was much more equipped to investigate these crimes.
While the FBI and local detectives look for clues to identify the killer stalking Akron, Richard Beasley prepares to strike again.
Because he got $0 out of Scott Davis, Richard Beasley then had to plot his next move. And that next move, of course, involved killing someone else.
Beasley decides to commit one last murder, then disappear for good. Through Craigslist, Beasley finds another victim, 47-year-old family man Tim Kern.
Tim Kern was the perfect mark for Richard Beasley. Desperate for work to help support his family.
On the morning of November 13th, 2011, Tim Kern writes, "I love you," in a text to his 19-year-old son, and drives north to meet his new employer at a pizza shop. Unaware that a new victim is driving straight into the grip of a murderer, detectives struggle to ID the killer before he strikes again.
While they were investigating the shooting of Scott Davis and still trying to substantiate his story, they came across surveillance video from a restaurant where Davis had met with the so-called Jack and Jack's young cohort.
And for the first time, they had photographs and were able to identify who these people were.
Police recognize the so-called Jack as their missing fallen preacher, Richard Beasley. They begin an all-out search for Beasley and his young accomplice. But Tim Kern is on his way to meet the killer. And time is running out. Tanya Beasley wants to cut her criminal father out of her life.
My dad had left me a voicemail, and I deleted it because I had no desire to keep in contact with him.
She has no idea that Richard Beasley has become the Craigslist killer. After Beasley botches his attempted murder of Scott Davis in the woods outside Akron, Ohio, he's desperate for one last score in order to skip town for good. He plans to kill and rob again, and he's pinned his hopes on down-and-out family man, Tim Kern.
Tim Kern responded to the Craigslist ad. Tim was 47 years old. He had worked as a street cleaner and lost his job. Had 2 sons and was really down on his luck, had struggled with some substance abuse issues, and was really looking to start a new life. He met with Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty at a fast food restaurant in the Akron area.
While Beasley prepares to kill Tim Kern, investigators interview Beasley's only child, Tanya.
I had finally been able to distance myself from my dad and taken on a normal teenage life. When I was working at a local fast food restaurant, a man showed up and flashed a badge. Of course, I figured this has to do with my dad. He's selling drugs again.
I have a couple questions about your father.
Okay.
First, they asked me all about his previous addresses, where he had lived, and then came a picture of him and Brogan. It was just a little weird to me. The agent received a phone call, and I overheard him talking about them finding another body.
Was the body located in the same area?
And my heart instantly dropped. My first thought was, this is a lot bigger than a drug deal. I straight up asked him to be honest with me and tell me if the call that he received and the bodies they were talking about had anything to do with my father. And he said yes.
Agents asked Tanya about a farm her father claims to own.
The questions that they were asking started to make sense. Did he have land? Where would he be staying? Those could all be places where there could be bodies or murders could have been committed. And it just kind of clicked. Like this whole time they've been asking me about murder.
FBI agents are no closer to finding Beasley when Tim Kern pulls up to meet him and Brogan.
During the police investigation of the Scott Davis claims, Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty had met with Tim Kern at a pizza place near Massillon, Ohio.
During his interview with Beasley, Tim Kern said he had a flat-screen TV, a laptop computer, things that Beasley saw as easily pawnable or sellable that he can make a quick buck with. Richard Beasley thought that he was going to score again, but he told Beasley that he had left the TV and the computer for his kids, and all he had on him was $5 in his pocket and a beat-up car. It really angered Beasley.
With so little to gain, Beasley decides to quickly dispose of his victim.
Once he realized he was only going to make $5 from this killing, Beasley decided to forego the trip to Southern Ohio, and instead he, Brogan, and Kern drove to an isolated spot behind an abandoned mall in Akron.
Beasley takes Kern to the Rolling Acres Mall, the same place he would take his daughter to throw coins in the fountain when she was young.
Due to the recession, the mall had all but closed. There were only 3 or 4 stores that were open, and it wasn't a very well-traveled area at the time that this occurred. Richard Beasley told Tim that he had lost his watch in a wooded area while squirrel hunting, and that was how Richard convinced Tim to get out of the car.
Brogan Rafferty recalls hearing a pop and then seeing Tim Kern drop to his knees. And because the gun was just a small caliber pistol, Richard Beasley had to fire several more shots into Tim Kern's head before he actually died.
Beasley and Brogan hastily bury the body in the woods next to the mall.
When I first found out that they'd found one of my father's victims at Rolling Acres Mall, I kind of got this awful gut feeling. I instantly started to cry. And what made me cry was the thought of my family there. To taint the only place I vividly remember us being a family, it's almost like that final step of ripping my father away from me. It might have only been one memory, but when one memory is all you have to look back on and feel that, that's your everything when it comes to that person.
FBI agents catch a break when they're able to use the Craigslist ad to track down their killer. The IP address of the computer used to place the ad leads them to a house in Akron.
The FBI goes to this house in Akron, talks to the landlord, and the landlord says, I don't know this Richard Beasley.
What about this guy?
Oh, yeah, that's Ralph Geiger. He's a good guy.
Ralph Geiger?
Yeah, good tenant, yeah.
And that is the first time that they realized that Beasley was actually assuming the identity of Ralph Geiger.
For the first time since a serial killer began stalking Akron, Ohio, the FBI has the upper hand, and they make a plan to lure Richard Beasley in. 50-year-old Ohio native Richard Beasley is on a killing spree, luring victims through a job ad on Craigslist. His daughter, Tanya, is shocked when the FBI pays her a visit.
It just kind of clicked. Like this whole time, they've been asking me about murder.
Over the course of 3 months, Richard Beasley killed 3 men, tried to kill a 4th, and assumed the identity of another man.
So far, Beasley's getting away with murder. But his luck is about to run out.
After interviewing Scott Davis, the FBI was able to conduct a forensic examination of Scott's computer, and that led them to an IP address that ultimately came back to Richard Beasley. He had been renting a room in the Akron area. The IP address actually came back to the address where that room was rented.
The FBI goes to this house in Akron, talks to the landlord, and the landlord says, I don't know this Richard Beasley.
What about this guy?
Oh, yeah, that's Ralph Geiger. He's a good guy.
Ralph Geiger?
Yeah, good tenant, yeah.
And that is the first time that they realized that Beasley was actually assuming the identity of Ralph Geiger. And based on the cell phone number that the landlord provided law enforcement, they were able to track the ping that came off the phone.
Due south? Okay, we got him. Let's go.
Police track the location of Beasley's cell phone and discover he's only blocks away.
Richard Beasley! Freeze!
They found him walking down the street. It was a normal, everyday arrest.
With Beasley in custody, FBI agents tracked down his accomplice, Brogan Rafferty. Police question Rafferty at school and then arrest him at his home later that day.
It was Brogan Rafferty's statement to law enforcement that led them to the bodies of both Ralph Geiger and Timothy Kern. Brogan was given an attorney, and there was discussion about a plea deal if Brogan continued to cooperate. But ultimately, Brogan reconsidered his options and decided that he wanted to take his chances at trial. Brogan was prosecuted and tried as an adult.
The only sentence that this court deems proportionate to the crimes you committed is life in prison without possibility of parole.
In November 2012, Brogan is found guilty of 3 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of attempted murder, and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 70 years.
Once I found out Brogan was involved, at first I just saw it as black and white. You know the difference between right and wrong, and what he did was wrong. But I think what was the hardest for me to grasp was the process that happened beforehand, because I saw who Brogan was and the way that he was when my dad first got out. I saw the type of person that my dad groomed him into being. But I just figured it was to do small things, such as selling drugs for him, or kind of managing the prostitution that was going on, or even just small things like petty theft. But I never imagined that it would get to the point where he convinced him to help him murder somebody. There are some days where I feel like had my dad and Brogan not met, that he would have a better life.
As Beasley's trial gets underway, the media dubs him the Craigslist Killer.
Count 1, indictment for aggravated murder. This is regarding Ralph Geiger with prior calculation and design. Guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. For aggravated murder, Timothy Kern. Guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Richard Beasley is convicted of charges including murder, kidnapping, and robbery, and is sentenced to death.
Richard Beasley appealed his sentence to the Ohio Supreme Court. The Ohio Supreme Court upheld the trial court's decision to sentence Richard Beasley to death.
Tanya Beasley gets another kind of life sentence. Through no fault of her own, she is forever known as the daughter of the Craigslist Killer.
It's hard to come to terms with being the daughter of the Craigslist Killer. One of the things that I struggled with getting past at first was people saying, "You are like your father. You will be like him." It made me question myself and who I was, whether the good in me really was good. And I finally learned that, you know, I control my future. You kind of create a path for yourself. You have to take control away from him and what his actions did and regain it. The irony is that he did teach me how to be good to people and how to bring them hope. If I can help others see that light, that's kind of what I want to do. Except I'm going to do it in the right way.
Paul Snyder is a small-time hustler with a silver tongue.
He said that I was very beautiful and that I should consider doing Playboy.
A teenage Patty Lauerman believes Snyder when he says he'll make her a famous model, just like his wife, Playboy superstar Dorothy Stratton.
Paul told me he saw her and he just knew that she would just be perfect for Playboy.
But at some point, things take a very, very bad turn.
For Dorothy, the dream comes to a bloody and shocking end.
It was a really bloody crime scene.
Now, an unsuspecting Patty is in the hands of a killer.
When I moved in with Paul, I was really looking forward to seeing where this was going to take me. I was his protege.
In the summer of 1980, Playboy playmate Dorothy Stratton is found naked and shot inside her West Los Angeles home. The killer, her estranged husband, Paul Snyder. Paul's roommate Patty is shocked by the gruesome murder.
Just the thought that that could have been me is pretty scary, and that I lived with somebody that is able to do that.
Dorothy's death is the end of a Hollywood fairy tale.
She's one of the most famous Playboy playmates. People are already comparing her to Marilyn Monroe.
She was comfortable in talk show appearances. She was comfortable in films and television. She was the whole package. They really thought that she was going to be a megastar.
Paul Snyder, a small-time hustler, had discovered Dorothy and helped make her a star. Earlier that year, the smooth-talking Snyder meets Patty Lauerman and tells her he can make her a star as well.
I thought that my dream was actually going to happen.
In 1979, Patty Lauerman is easy prey for the opportunistic Snyder. The pretty 17-year-old high school senior has dreams of becoming a glamorous model.
Modeling was exciting. It just intrigued me. I thought it was, you know, all the beautiful women and the natural beauty, and that's what I was interested in.
But the bustling city of Los Angeles, where dreams are made, is a world away from Riverside, California, where Patty lives a typical middle-class life.
My parents were from the Netherlands, and they're very strict. We all had a very strict schedule. We had to be in the house before 5 o'clock, make sure the table was set at a certain time. My dad would come outside and clap his hands really loud, and all the kids in the neighborhood knew that, oh, you guys better go home, your dad's calling you.
Then, in the fall of 1979, Patty lands a modeling gig promoting cars at an auto show.
I went to the Ontario Raceway when they used to have the car show over there with the funny cars, the race cars. We would stand and smile and hand out pamphlets about their company.
Standing next to a hot rod, Lauerman comes face to face with a killer.
I was handing out flyers, and Paul walked up to talk to me.
You are beautiful.
Thank you.
He kind of reminded me of Mr. like what we would say suave, because he was wearing these snakeskin boots, some tight slacks with a nice belt, and his shirt tucked in and his buttons undone on the top. He said that I was very beautiful and that he thought that I should consider doing Playboy.
Have you ever maybe thought about a career in modeling?
Yeah, I have.
I was nervous but very excited, but at the same time, you're still very cautious. I've had so many promises, even at that age.
But Patty's fear disappears when Paul makes a surprising offer that changes Patty's life forever.
He said his wife was the Playmate of the Year and that he really wanted to introduce me to her.
By 1980, Dorothy Stratton is living the life that Patty can only dream of as Playboy's Playmate of the Year.
Dorothy is already on her way to becoming a major star. Not only a Playboy playmate and a beautiful model, but she's getting those TV and movie roles that eluded all the playmates before her. She is on her way to becoming a movie star.
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
And suddenly Dorothy Stratton is there at the auto show, standing in front of a young and impressionable Patty Lauerman.
Seeing the two together made me feel much more comfortable than if I had just Paul approach me. They'd be giggling and laughing and talking about stuff. They definitely seemed to be in love.
Paul and Dorothy's relationship is not just personal, it's professional. Snyder is also Dorothy's agent. He tells the young, impressionable Patty that together, he and his wife have the know-how and connections to make her famous.
Paul and Dorothy saw in Patty a lot of what Dorothy had, that same beauty and charisma and charm, and they thought maybe she had what it would take to become a star.
I felt that there was possibly a future here with the two of them together working as my managers. I was screaming inside like, oh my God, this could actually be something for real, because they were genuine. It was so exciting. And right away I was calling home to tell my mom about it, and I called my friends.
Patty has no reason to suspect Paul of any wrongdoing and is dazzled by the glamorous Dorothy and her story of success. Paul doesn't waste time and soon gets in touch.
After the car show, Paul had called me the following week and asked me to come out and go visit them at their place.
As soon as she arrives, Paul regales Patty with the story of how he discovered Dorothy and turned her into a star.
Paul told me he saw her and she was so beautiful and she was so innocent. He just knew that she would just be perfect for Playboy, and he persuaded her to do some pictures.
By all accounts, Dorothy was a very sweet, lovable person. I don't think when she was growing up, she had aspirations of fame and fortune, but Paul was a smarmy guy, and he was really smitten with her. He saw her as an opportunity, really. And he'd been, weirdly enough, trying to get women into Playboy for a while, and he saw this as his meal ticket.
Paul Snider sends photos of Dorothy to Playboy, and Hugh Hefner asks for Dorothy to fly in from Vancouver to meet him in Hollywood. Dorothy flies to LA for a Playboy test shoot, her first time on a plane.
Dorothy meets Hugh Hefner, and things are just taking off. He tells her, "I'm going to make you Playmate of the Month for August of 1979, and the entire Playboy publicity machine is gonna start working for you." And she gets a part in this very popular TV show called Fantasy Island, and this Buck Rogers TV show, and she's booking talk show gigs and photo shoots. A star is born. Topping everything off is the ultimate thing she wants to hear, and that's when Hefner tells her, "You're going to be Playmate of the Year for 1980. Paul Snider can't believe his luck and the hard work that went into this. He wanted to make her a star, and now she's becoming a star, and everything he dreamed of is coming true. And so he proposes to Dorothy, and in June of 1979, they get married in Las Vegas.
Dorothy's meteoric rise to stardom and Paul's role as her manager is all the proof Patty needs, and Snider tells Patty he has a plan for her.
Paul wanted Dorothy and himself to represent me as managers, especially with Dorothy being involved with Playboy and involved with acting and her other modeling.
Without giving it a second thought, Patty puts her trust in Snider.
Paul was able to help make Dorothy a star, and now he's pushing to make Patty a star. But Patty is young, she's naive, she's impressionable, and she has no idea what a dark past Paul really has.
Paul Snider is in his 20s and living in Vancouver's harsh East End before moving to Hollywood. And even at that young age, he has a shady reputation.
In his 20s, Paul Snider hung out in clubs and bars in the Gastown and Hornby Street section of Vancouver. And this is the rough section of town back in those days, you know, with rumors of underworld figures lurking about.
Paul feels right at home in the seedy part of town. He even makes sure to dress the part.
Paul struck a dramatic, distinctive figure. He's got the little mustache and the shirts unbuttoned and the chains and the cool clothes and the boots and the fur. Paul transformed himself into this sort of what we'd call a player now. And a lot of women were attracted to that, you know, that there was both a charisma and a sense of danger that surrounded Paul.
Snider charms the women, but ultimately uses them as a way to earn a buck.
There was a dark side to Paul Snider. He is doing some kind of unsavory stuff. You know, he's putting on these wet t-shirt contests, and he's suspected of essentially being a pimp and turning out these women to prostitution. In 1976, Vancouver police had Paul under investigation for possibly pimping. But there was a witness from out of town, and the department didn't want to spend the money to have her travel and testify and talk about Paul, and so the case was essentially dropped.
Now, standing in his kitchen in West Hollywood, Snider tells Patty he's going to take her to the Playboy Mansion and introduce her to Hollywood heavyweight Hugh Hefner. On a sunny afternoon, Patty makes the trip to the Playboy Mansion with Snider and Dorothy. Patty thinks her dreams of modeling and fame are finally coming true, never suspecting that she's put her future in the hands of a killer. In 1980, Dorothy Stratton, one of the most famous Playboy playmates of all time, is murdered by her husband and manager, Paul Snider. Only months before, the smooth-talking Snider takes teenaged Patty Lauerman under his wing, promising to make her a star as well. Now he's taking her to the Playboy Mansion.
It was really, really exciting going to the mansion.
Snider seems legit, but when it comes to women, he's an opportunist.
Paul took Patty Lauerman to the Playboy Mansion, and that was going to be our big unveiling to Hefner. He was going to parade her around, and, you know, they're going to say, well, he did it once, he could do it again.
Paul had told me it's beautiful up there, you're gonna love it. You can order food, whatever you want to eat. You're gonna notice that Hef has M&Ms in bowls everywhere because he liked to be able to dip into them whenever he walked around. And he just said, just go and enjoy yourself and wear something really nice. From the town that I was in, a lot of people thought that the mansion was a big party place full of craziness and drugs. And when I went up there, it was just like a sanctuary for the women to be safe and relax and not be bothered by anyone.
Hi.
I got to meet Hugh Hefner, and he's very sweet. He was kind of hard to understand. He kind of seemed like he mumbled when he talks a little bit.
Dazzled by the lavish party and celebrity guests, Patty notices an odd exchange between Hef and Paul Snider.
It seemed like Paul was about to try to talk to him, and Hef just kind of walked away. I noticed that he really didn't spend time with them.
Paul Snider's hanging out at the Playboy Mansion, but he doesn't fit in, you know, with his unbuttoned shirt, his gold chain, and his little mustache. This was cool about 10 years earlier, but he just sticks out like a sore thumb in the late 1970s. And most importantly, Hugh Hefner is not impressed. In fact, Hugh Hefner is worried about Paul. He thinks he looks like a pimp.
Hugh Hefner may dislike Paul Snider, but Patty's experience at the mansion has her hooked.
Patty is finding herself making more trips to the bright lights and glamour of Los Angeles while she's finishing up high school in Riverside.
And while Patty attends her classes and dreams of a life of money and glamour, fame begins to tear Paul and Dorothy Stratton's lives apart.
By spring of 1980, Dorothy Stratton is on her way to becoming a star. She's appearing in these TV shows, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Galaxina, Fantasy Island. She's on the chair next to Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. She's getting all these things that she always dreamed of. But as Dorothy's star is rising, she is spending less and less time at home with Paul, and more time in photo shoots, on TV sets, and most of all at the Playboy Mansion.
Dorothy had told me that Hef had a rule at the mansion. No boyfriends or husbands were allowed up there unless the women requested it, and he approved it because he wanted it to be a place where the girls could go and escape and be able to relax. But they were friends of Hefner's that he did allow up there.
While Dorothy relaxes in the comfort of the Playboy Mansion, she meets powerful men, including star director Peter Bogdanovich. Famous for Hollywood films such as The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon, Bogdanovich is a fixture at the Playboy Mansion.
Dorothy was like, who's that? And I'm like, it's Peter Bogdanovich from, Paper Moon. She's like, but that was the first time that he had ever seen her. She was very different from the other women that I had seen him with, because he kind of had like a type, and she was a little bit outside of that type.
Bogdanovich falls fast for the stunning and charismatic Stratton.
After Dorothy meets director Peter Bogdanovich at the mansion, he offers her a role in his upcoming comedy, They All Laughed, which is shooting in New York City.
They All Laughed begins filming in New York in March 1980. Peter Bogdanovich declares the set closed to everyone but cast and crew. Snider is not happy about being shut out.
Paul Snider would go wherever Dorothy could. He would be at her side at all times. because Dorothy was his prize. And Dorothy was starting to come to realization that she had to sort of distance herself because he was becoming a nuisance. She couldn't get any work done because he was around all the time.
Paul Snyder stays home in Los Angeles.
Snyder saw Bogdanovich as a danger because he felt Dorothy slipping away from him. He was losing his grip on his star.
I was in New York with her, and we talked about her getting a new manager, a new agent, going to a major agency, and that this was the time to do it.
Hi. Looking for Dorothy Stratton?
From his West Hollywood home, Paul keeps calling his wife at her hotel in New York.
Paul would be trying to call Dorothy, and he'd kind of pound the counter, you know, just upset that he couldn't get through.
There's a reason Paul can't reach his wife in her hotel suite. She's sleeping in another suite with director Peter Bogdanovich.
When they were making They All Laughed in New York, that's when Dorothy and Peter Bogdanovich began a relationship.
Dorothy keeps her relationship with Peter Bogdanovich secret, but sends Paul a disturbing note.
While Dorothy's hanging out with Bogdanovich in New York City, she sends Paul essentially a Dear John letter and says, "We have to live apart, we have to live separately. I want a separation."
Losing his wife is more than a heartache. It could cost Paul his livelihood.
For Paul, it's not just an emotional blow, it's a financial blow. He's a Canadian citizen. He needs Dorothy to make it easier for him to work in the United States. So to lose Dorothy or to be separated from Dorothy doesn't just mean losing his love and losing his dreams, it means losing money. It's only through friends that Paul finds out that after shooting They All Laughed, Dorothy is not off in London with a friend of hers, she's off in London with Peter Bogdanovich. And this is devastating to him.
Sensing his money and even his legal status is at risk,
Hey, Patty.
Paul redoubles his efforts to convince Patty to move to Hollywood as soon as she graduates and let him guide her to fame.
I think you should come out here as soon as possible.
He was really pushing for me to get pictures going, telling me that I really needed to go to acting school because that would help me with modeling. He said Dorothy did that and it helped her 100%, and that's why she was doing so well. I thought that my dream was actually going to happen. I was so ecstatic. I was very excited about going there.
Unaware of the breakup between Paul and Dorothy, Patty finishes high school and moves into Paul Snyder's house to chase her dreams of stardom.
I couldn't believe I was actually living in Hollywood.
But Patty finds everything has changed, including Paul himself.
When I moved in there, I thought everything was fine between the two of them. I had no idea that they were estranged, that they weren't even speaking. He was telling me that he knows that she's being brainwashed by somebody. That's what he felt, and that he just was so concerned about her.
Damn it. I'm really sorry, Paul.
And I told him, you know, she's young and she's beautiful and she's got a lot going for her, and she has all this stuff happening to her, and you guys got married pretty young, that you may have to accept what's happening. And he started to cry and he was like, I just love her, I don't want anything to happen to her. And I just told him, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, it's yours, and if it's not, it never was. I said, you don't want to smother her. I said, I've done that to boyfriends and it just chases them away. Here's a 17-year-old giving him advice, but I was just trying to, you know, help him out, talk to him a little bit, because he was really distraught at that time.
Depressed and running low on money, a dejected Paul Snyder tries to stay focused on the 17-year-old beauty now living in his house.
With Dorothy leaving the picture, the best way for Paul to be making money, to remain able to work in the United States, is to make Patty a star.
Paul was going through a lot, but he always was very nice to me. When I was there, I felt like he was like my big brother or my boss, is how I felt. and I was his protege. I mean, he was the one that was directing me and what I needed to do and the steps that I needed to take.
He's grooming her to be this Playboy model. He's teaching her how to dress. She's very young at this time, and he's treating her very, very well. And because he is this sort of domineering figure, he stepped into this sort of father-like role. He was telling her how to act, what to wear, what to eat, etc., because that was going to be his next big ticket.
Unaware that police once suspected Snyder of pimping, Patty has no suspicions when Snyder sends her to meet a man with a history of manipulating young women.
Paul wanted me to meet somebody that he said would possibly have some modeling connections. He told me, I'm gonna drop you off and then I'll be sitting outside, you know, waiting for you. So I said, okay, and I went in.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
He asked me, you know, oh, what do you want to do? I said, I'd love to get into movies. And he said, well, that would be great. And from there, things started to be kind of strange. He said, how do I know how good you're going to be when you're in movies? First of all, we need to see how you look.
Former pimp Paul Snyder has delivered 17-year-old Patty into the hands of a predator.
He started to try to take my shirt down. I was scared.
"17-year-old Patty Lauerman, with dreams of Hollywood stardom, is living in the house of promoter Paul Snyder, unaware that Snyder is slowly losing control.
When I was there, I felt like he was like my big brother or my boss, and I was his protege.
Paul has already turned his wife, Dorothy Stratton, into a Playboy superstar.
By the time Patty Lauerman meets Dorothy Stratton, Dorothy is already on her way to becoming a major star. She is that elusive thing that Playboy always wanted. Never was Playboy ever able to take their models as beautiful and as charismatic as they were and get them into television and movies. She was the first one to make that big transition from the pages of Playboy magazine to the television and movie screens.
But within one short year, Stratton wants to leave her husband behind, and now Paul Snyder is at risk of losing it all.
If Dorothy leaves Paul, he loses not only a wife, but his source of income and the possibility of continuing to work in the United States.
To drum up new business and save himself, Snyder sends innocent 17-year-old Patty Lauerman in to meet a dangerous Hollywood player without warning her of the risks.
He said, how do I know how good you're going to be when you're in movies? First of all, we need to see how you look. He started to try to take my shirt down. I was scared.
No. Hey, wait a minute. Where are you going?
I stepped back saying, what do you think you're doing? Well, he chased me literally around the office. I managed to get to the door and get out of there and then ran out. And there was Paul waiting for me. And I sat in the car and I said, this guy is trying to get me to take my clothes off so he can see my body. I said, what does that have to do with modeling and acting?
Drawing from his shady days in Vancouver, Paul tries to reassure Patty with a lie.
And he said, I kind of knew that was going to happen, but I wanted you to see what you could be in for in the movie industry. I wanted to make sure that you'd be able to handle yourself, and you did. And I said, and if that's what it takes to do movies, that I have to do this, then I'm not interested. I'll go back to Riverside. At that point, I wasn't so much angry as I was just so flustered. I was so upset and kind of even a little bit scared.
With Patty Lauerman no closer to making him money, Paul Snyder considers more drastic measures.
It gets so bad that Paul reportedly goes to the bank with a woman posing as Dorothy to try to get her personal funds.
He actually went to a bank with a blonde and saying, this is my wife, Dorothy. We want to take some money out. I mean, that's how bad it got.
Paul Snyder's ploy fails. The bank refuses him Stratton's money, leaving him broke and humiliated. More desperate than ever, Snyder works yet another angle to earn some cash.
Schneider was into fitness, and he had invented a weightlifting bench for himself that he thought might take off, and that really went nowhere. But then his wheels were turning, as they always were. He re-welded this weight bench into this sex chair, like a bondage kind of a thing. He took it to the Pleasure Chest over in West Hollywood to market it to them, saying, you know, look, we can make these things, and you know, and this is what it's good for, and they weren't really interested in it. So this prototype ended up sitting in his bedroom at his home.
Snyder is running out of options to stay afloat, but he takes one more shot at making ends meet.
Snyder always had a new idea, you know, be it a wet t-shirt contest or a wet jockey shorts contest, and he saw this idea of the Chippendales. Well, it's much like the Playboy Club, you know. They had these pretty girls walking around with bunny ears and little collars and cuffs. Well, why don't we do this for women? So the Chippendales came about, where he would put the cuffs on the guys, and you know, they were topless and very sexy, and that was that was a really innovative thing.
Innovative or not, Snyder can't get along with his business partners.
He came up with the idea of Chippendales, but the people that he worked with took the idea from him and pushed him out of the deal. He got screwed over on that. And that started to take a toll on him. It really upset him. There were times when he would break down.
It was very, very sad. I'm sure that played into his decision. As if he had been making money with the Chippendales, he might have seen something to live for.
Out of options and out of cash, Snyder is pushed to his breaking point.
Paul tries to make it without Dorothy, but all of his non-Dorothy projects fall through, and this is driving him into a rage. Paul's back is up against the wall. He's losing money. He might have to leave LA and go back to Canada. And the more his fortunes decline, the more he thinks about how hard he worked and everything he poured into Dorothy to make her a star, and how resentful he is about that.
Paul was really upset. If it wasn't for him, you know, Dorothy wouldn't have even been where she was. That he was the one who discovered her in Canada and brought her out here, and now her career was taking off, and she's going up, and he's just staying there.
In August of 1980, Paul realizes that he can't have what he once had with Dorothy. She's not going to be in his life anymore. He has to go through intermediaries to try to talk to her. Phone calls are not returned. There are middlemen he has to deal with for the first time. He is at wit's end, and it is this point, after 3 months of trying to get her back into his life without success, that he decides to get a gun.
When I moved in there, we had a gathering of a lot of friends. And one of the friends had a handgun. And Paul asked to look at it.
Can I see that?
It was startling. He said that he wanted to just try it because he was interested in wanting to purchase a handgun to keep in the house for safety.
But Snyder has no concerns about personal safety. He's begun to formulate his deadly plan, and he needs a weapon.
Paul claims he needs this gun for protection, and he sees one advertised in the classified ads, little magazine, and he and Patty go out to the San Fernando Valley, driving around trying to find the seller, but they get lost.
Where is this place?
Couldn't find the place, so we just wound up going home. And Paul was so frustrated. You know, he started to cry, and he was like, I just love her. I don't want anything to happen to her. And I told him, you know, you may have to accept what's happening. You might not be able to change things. And that if she loves you, she's going to be there for you, but you guys are really young, and sometimes you have to let somebody go.
teenaged Patty Lauerman wants Snyder to set Dorothy Stratton free, but it's too late. Snyder's love has turned to rage. Estranged from his wife, Playboy playmate Dorothy Stratton, Paul Snyder is at a breaking point. His roommate, Patty, encourages him to move on.
I told him, you know, you may have to accept what's happening. You might not be able to change things.
But a desperate Paul drives to the Playboy mansion looking for Dorothy.
What really ended it for Snyder was the night that he went to the Playboy mansion. And he got up to the gates and talked to the famous rock that you talk to when you get to the Playboy mansion. The security answered, and he said, "Hey, I'm Paul Snyder here, and I'm here to see Mr. Hefner." And the guard buzzed Hefner, and Hefner said, "No. Under no circumstances will you let this man on the property." And that was like the kick in the teeth for Snyder. That was it for him. He was gone, extricated.
Then, only 3 days after he learns he's barred from the Playboy mansion, Dorothy finally calls.
Dorothy's in the Mojave Desert shooting a sunglasses ad when she calls Paul.
Hello, Paul. It's Dorothy calling. I finished my interviews, and I'll be in if you want to call me. Bye-bye.
Dorothy and Paul agree to meet at Paul's house in West LA. The day before that meeting, Paul finds a Mossberg shotgun for sale in a classified ad and buys it. That night, Paul breaks down again, and Patty tries to console her troubled roommate.
Paul's main concern with his discussion with Dorothy is he wanted to work out somehow that he would be able to remain in the United States, so that he wouldn't have to go back to Canada. He told me that he realized that he's losing Dorothy, that he can't make her stay and love him. So he told me that he was going to talk to her, and that he had talked to his attorney, and he said that he was going to just resolve what he needed to resolve with her, and that he was going to let her go, that he was going to accept it.
On August 14th, Patty leaves the house so Paul can meet privately with Dorothy. At 2 p.m., Snyder greets the beautiful woman he married and made famous.
Dorothy drives up to their house in the afternoon, and she doesn't want to be with Paul, but she's going to have this last meeting to try to work things out.
Thanks for coming.
Hi.
Come on in.
She goes into the house, and we know they have a conversation. We're not sure how long, but she leaves her purse in the living room, and inside her purse is more than $1,000 she's taken out of the bank to give to Paul to help him out. They go into the bedroom. Paul, on the other hand, wants to maybe salvage his relationship with Dorothy.
Paul may have begged Dorothy to take him back, promising things between them will get better.
He wants to still be close to her. He wants to still hold on to this dream of making her a star and riding her coattails.
While Paul begs his wife for a second chance, Patty roller skates on Venice Beach.
I went roller skating with my friend, and Paul had said he wanted to join us. So he said, call me around 3 o'clock, and then I'm going to come over there with you guys. So I should be done by then.
Paul and Dorothy talk.
I'm filing for divorce.
We're not getting a divorce.
At some point, things take a very, very bad turn.
I'm leaving you, Paul.
No one's leaving.
Yes, I am.
No one's leaving.
At 3 o'clock, I called Paul, and it just rang and rang and rang.
What are you doing?
And so I hung up, and I thought, oh, I guess they're probably busy, and he doesn't want to pick up the phone. We skated until 5 o'clock. And then we went back to the house, and Dorothy's car was there. And we came in the house, and the living room is upstairs, and Dorothy's purse was on one of the steps. I was picturing them embracing each other and then just throwing her stuff down and running into the bedroom and being together, and they had worked everything out.
Patty assumes the one-time lovers want to be left alone. But as the hours pass, Neither Paul nor Dorothy make a single sound.
My friend had made a remark that he hadn't heard the toilet flush, which I thought was funny, but I didn't hear anything either. So at this point, I was saying, no, we don't want to bother him. But then he kept persisting. He said it'd been a long time. You need to go see what's happening. I called out, and nobody answered.
As concern turns to fear, Patty and her friend approach the bedroom.
So we went up to the door. It was terrible.
17-year-old Patty Lauerman is worried. She hasn't heard from her roommate, Paul Snyder, or his estranged wife, Playboy playmate Dorothy Stratton, for hours.
Paul? My friend had made a remark that he hadn't heard the toilet flush, which I thought was funny, but I didn't hear anything either. He said it'd been a long time. You need to go see what's happening. I called out, and nobody answered. So we went up to the door.
Patty will never forget what she saw on the worst day of her life.
It was terrible. It was like a staged horror movie. They were both dead. They were both naked. They'd been dead for at least 8 hours.
I mean, she was shot in the face. It was a really bloody crime scene. I mean, there was gore on the walls and the curtains in the room.
Investigators arrive on the scene and piece together what happened in the moments before Paul Snyder and Dorothy Stratton die.
The conversation probably began amicably. They probably tried to work out their differences as they had before. They probably tried to reach a financial agreement, but at some point, everything went violent.
I'm leaving you, Paul.
No one's leaving.
Yes, I am.
No one's leaving.
What are you doing?
Everything went wrong. We know that there was this brutal, violent round of sex. And it probably wasn't consensual on Dorothy's part.
I think that Paul Snyder was exercising his last bit of control over her, and it went out of control.
At some point, the shotgun comes out.
No!
Dorothy, in a futile attempt to protect herself, lifts up her hand. The gun goes off. Blows off one of her fingers and takes off a lot of her face. Paul is looking at what has happened, and he turns the gun on himself.
First thing you see is Paul's body laying on the floor, and then we saw Dorothy laying on the bed. But because we didn't see a weapon, then we started to wonder if somebody else had shot both of them. There could be somebody still out there, which really freaked me out.
When their bodies are discovered, at first nobody even sees the gun because he had fallen on the shotgun. But when the body is removed, they see the weapon. By all accounts, it is a murder-suicide.
They pretty much made it a quick open and shut case that they just said Paul killed her and killed himself, and that was pretty much done. They didn't do a very long investigation at all.
The horror she witnessed has a lasting effect on Patty.
I'm just in the beginning of starting my career of trying to do acting and modeling in LA, and this is pretty much one of the first things I see. I had a really hard time sleeping for a long time. When I think about what happened, it's like, what if he had freaked out like that when I was there?
Police prohibit Lauerman from discussing the crime with anyone, but the story of the murder soon hits the airwaves.
Playboy magazine's 1980 Playmate of the Year has been found shot to death, killed apparently by her estranged husband, who then killed himself.
With Paul and Dorothy dead, and her dreams of a modeling career slipping away, Patty musters the strength to send new photos to Hugh Hefner at Playboy.
I had another photographer, and he did pictures for me because I was old enough now, and he sent them to Playboy, the test shots. When they received them, they called me right away and wanted to set up a shoot. So I actually went and did a shoot at a big mansion house in Beverly Hills. They flew in a photographer, and we had a really good shoot.
Patty's dreams of appearing in Playboy are reignited. But when lawsuits break out over Dorothy's untimely death, Patty is caught in the middle.
I had an appointment to go up to the mansion, and I met with Hef. And then I sat down with his lawyers for hours and hours. I submitted an affidavit for them as a witness to a lot of the concerns that Hef was being sued for.
Hefner's lawyers want to protect him from any claim that Playboy may have somehow triggered Stratton's death.
I asked the attorneys what that was going to do with the centerfold that I had just done, and they said that at this point, everything is on hold because if this goes to court, then I'm going to have to be a witness, and if I was involved with Playboy, then my testimony might be seen as I was getting paid off.
Once again, Lauerman's dreams are shattered.
It kind of put a wrench in anything I had going. So I packed what I could, I went to the bus station, and I hopped on a bus and went home to Riverside.
This is obviously a horribly tragic story for Dorothy Stratton, but it's also sad for Patty Lauerman. She had everything going for her. She was beautiful, she had charisma, but because she was so close to Paul Snider, everything bad that happened to Dorothy spilled over to Patty. Patty Lauerman became famous for all the wrong reasons, and it destroyed her career.
Even though her dreams of acting and modeling don't come true, Patty finds happiness in her personal life.
So today, many years later, I'm a mother. I have 2 beautiful children, and like my oldest daughter has her 4-year-old daughter, my beautiful grandchild. And I look at her and she's so beautiful and she loves to dance and she's got such a personality, and I just think I just don't even want her to even consider that career. I just don't even want to have anything to do with Hollywood. That's just something that was in my past, and that's where it stays in my past. I moved on, I'm happy with my family, and it's just now, it's like history for me.